All right, why don't we get started? Thank you again to everyone joining us, and it's more than appropriate to start this way. Happy National Apprenticeship Week. I think, this week, the theme of it has been really highlighting the impact that apprenticeships provide. Certainly through this conversation today, we'll kind of delve into what that impact looks like, in real time. And so glad to be part of this fireside chat together with my colleagues, Jenna Sandker for MSK and Becca Hunting from CareerWise New York. So why don't we start with a quick round of introductions? I'll kick us off. Tony Gasson, everyone, VP of Employer Partnerships here at CareerWise New York. I'm responsible for working with closely with our employer partners to make sure they're able to stand up successful youth apprenticeship programs as well as our business development practice. Jenna, why don't we kick things off to you?
Thanks, Tony, and thanks so much for inviting me today. Jenna Sandker, Director of Talent Acquisition at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. In my role, I'm responsible for how we attract and pipeline talent, internal mobility, and our workforce development programs. Just a quick moment for those that might not be familiar with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. We are primarily based, our largest locations, I should say, in Manhattan and New York City, but also have locations in New Jersey, Westchester, and Long Island. We are over 20,000 employees strong, and are solely dedicated to the cure and treatment of cancer.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jenna. And Becca?
Hi, great to be here, and thanks to Tony for moderating. I'm Becca Hunting. I'm the Senior Director of Research and Data Management at CareerWise New York. So in my role, I'm responsible for building our measurement and data strategy, which is understanding how are we measuring our impact in the program and how we are serving our stakeholders, including our apprentices and our employer partners.
Fantastic. And again, such a pleasure to have you both as part of this chat. Again, just to frame us, I think that's certainly true this week, but there's a lot of energy and fervor and excitement around apprenticeships nationally, and particularly in this youth apprenticeship space, right? And the three of us, I think we know it really well that apprenticeship in general works, and it's the purpose of this conversation to help others appreciate just why it works and then what the return on investment is for individuals and businesses that engage in apprenticeship. So we're going to talk about that in depth today. I'd like to kick this conversation off by asking you a question, Becca. The question is, so again, there's a lot of talk around return. There is an intrinsic investment that people have to make in order for this to work. And the investment at times can be hefty. So when we talk about return on that investment for employer partners, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as you said, it's really important that we are building an evidence base that's really broad and diverse in this work. And for CareerWise, we're an intermediary, so we're sitting in between a lot of different partners and stakeholders and trying to understand and essentially collate themes around metrics and models like return on investment so that we can then disseminate that information, make sense of it, and project it out for other programs and partners to understand. So what are we talking about with return on investment? We're talking about essentially, do the benefits of the program and the worth of those benefits outweigh the costs of the program? And benefits and costs are both really broad. And for CareerWise, we're measuring what those benefits and costs are across roughly 40 firms across the city. They're all engaging in the program for different ways. They have different motivations. Those motivations are often evolving on the fly. We're running across different industries, different sectors, and roughly 14 different occupations. So trying to create a kind of centralized return on investment model is challenging. Is not really the thing that we're trying to do. We're really trying to understand, again, what are kind of the themes that we're seeing across those employers so that then we can build a measurement framework based off of that. So in looking at all the diversity of benefits and costs, there are standards. There are ways that individual firms are measuring benefits and costs that are generally all the same. So the first is in direct or financial benefits and costs. And the first way is in skilled work. And what do we mean by skilled work? We're talking about what are the work products and efforts that are aligned with the specific training occupation, and how is that skilled work progressing or increasing over time? And then how is that relating to their wages? So if my wages are incrementally increasing, but my skill is exponentially increasing, you're going to start to see a huge return on investment for employers and what they're getting back from that labor. So what we're seeing in the program is that by and large, our supervisors are saying that apprentices are contributing valuable work products. Roughly 82% say their apprentices are contributing valuable work products. And we're seeing that our apprentices by exit are at 84% proficiency, which is where we want them to be. But their wages are roughly 56% of an average full-time employee in an entry-level role in the same occupation. And so that's showing us that by the end of the program, there is a significant return on investment in the skills employers are getting versus what they're paying in wages, which would be one of the costs. Another benefit is the unskilled work. So this is the work that apprentices are doing, their effort that's not necessarily aligned with their occupation, but is still contributing to the workplace. So what are kind of those professional skills that they're adding? What might be some of the more broad generalist skills that they're adding to the workplace? And you see this a lot in the early months of training before they've really kind of dug their feet into their specific occupation. It's a reason why overseas, a lot of employers do rotationals at the beginning of the apprenticeship. And that's so apprentices they're kind of maximizing that unskilled time so that they can kind of benefit from it the most in the point at which they have the most unskilled work. And then we have costs, right? Or we have cost savings, which is when you're able to retain this talent in training and then retain that talent into a full-time role. We generally see that apprentices are more likely to stay with their companies, get promoted, increase in leadership positions, maybe in turn supervise other apprentices, and there's a kind of financial return that individual firms are going to see from that. And then we have costs, obviously. The costs come in three big buckets. We have wages, we have the supervisor wages and the effort that they have to put towards training, and then we have training resources, equipment, materials, software, hardware, et cetera. So that's kind of one big part of the return on investment equation. We also have this other part that CareerWise wanted to focus on, which is what are the non-financial benefits to employers? What are employers seeing that's really hard to quantify sometimes, but we want to try to help them quantify, and that they do internally largely measure themselves around their existing workforce. And so we wanted to look at what does company training look like? So using apprenticeship to strengthen broad internal training structures and that sort of vertical of training that might already exist in a company, or maybe it doesn't. How can apprenticeship bring some structure to that? The second is community development. How is a company reaching out and building a relationship with their local community, hiring from their local community, and maybe helping them achieve social equity goals through apprenticeship? And the last is existing workforce development. How are we using apprenticeship to upskill our managers and our managerial workforce, particularly in the way that they're supporting early career talent today? So that's generally overarching costs and benefits in each side of that ROI equation.
All right, very good. I think in everything that you just mentioned, right, there's a huge potential for developing ROI for employer partners through engaging with apprentices. Secondary question on that same note, is it important to consider motivations to pursuing ROI or in measuring ROI for our employer partners? And I'll stop there.
Yes, so without knowing a motivation, it's hard to know what questions you want to ask. So motivations for us signal priorities, and priorities signal resources. Motivations can evolve, which is really important, but they inform how a company is going to measure ROI in terms of what metrics they want to include and how they're going to weigh those metrics in an overall model for understanding did we get a return on our investment? So for instance, if a company is saying, we are engaging in this, and maybe again, this is the primary or priority reason, and maybe it's going to evolve over time. We're engaging in this model because we want to diversify our talent pathways. We're seeing a severe talent shortage and the representation in talent in our companies and in certain occupations. And we want to increase that diversity and representation. And we want to do that through this really high local community engagement. They may weigh that in terms of an outcome in their ROI model differently than they may weigh other costs or benefits. And it's important to understand those motivations so we can help kind of deliver that data and those outcomes to those companies. So we see a lot of different motivations across employers, political motivations for engaging. To be really clear about that, it's really important when a whole community is kind of rallying behind a certain ecosystem or movement. And apprenticeship, especially in New York City right now, is it's been a political agenda item, which helps motivate companies for wanting to engage in this type of model. But there's CSR strategies that align really well with apprenticeship around workforce development. There's philanthropic priorities around apprenticeship. There's, again, this connection to local community. There's a severe skills shortage, a real one in a lot of our industries in the city, and roles that they're having a hard time skilling for and filling. And then again, there's these kind of diversifying talent pathways. So those are kind of the primary motivations that we see across our different employers, and that we're going to kind of take into account as we're building a measurement strategy to help us, again, build this evidence base around employer return on investment.
Really awesome to hear. I'm curious, and I'll direct this to you, Jenna. What were MSK's motivations for engaging youth apprenticeship? And let's start there, and then I have a secondary question that we'll get to.
Sure. So we initially engaged with CareerWise and started down our youth apprenticeship journey, which it absolutely has been a journey, in early 2021. And at the time, it really was, we were trying to understand how could we not only build diverse talent pipelines, but really think about getting into a talent population that we had not yet really figured out a way to do, which was high school students. And we knew that we needed a way to kind of start and pilot that out. And I'll tell you, that's where we started now, gosh, 3 years ago. And as we've evolved and grown, it's really become an opportunity for us to look at where is the market, deficient of talent? How can we think about what programs, even education providers, cannot supplement the talent that the market needs? And how do we really think about building those out to not only fill as our own needs as an employer, but really think about other peer organizations in our industry and what that might look like. So, where we started to where we are, I don't think we have lost those initial reasons for looking at this. But I think it's certainly evolved as we've continued along.
And I think along those same lines, Jenna, it's evolved in a way that makes sense. Would you be able to speak to specific things that you all are thinking about in terms of motivation evolution that might impact the program moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a little bit of historic context because I think it will help frame this for folks. So when we initially started, our goal was to identify occupations that could be industry transferable, right? So if we were thinking, okay, sure, we're in healthcare, but what is a role or a job that someone could also go do at a financial institution, or perhaps could do in manufacturing, or even look in any other sector. And so we started with our apprentices first in supply chain. So we knew this is currently a need. It will continue to be a need that will evolve in a skill set that these folks could benefit from learning at an early age. And so we started small with some folks there. As we continued to progress, we looked around our organization and also thought about where do we have a talent need now, but where will we continue to? So not just thinking about how do we have apprentices doing skilled work, but also where do we have opportunities for, early career or entry level talent? And that, quite honestly, put us down a path that we realized there were some areas we might have wanted to, but at the time we were only hiring folks with actual experience. And so we knew we needed a place that this was going to be the right fit, but also somewhere that beyond that first full-time role, they'd be able to continue to grow their career path. So then we expanded to include finance and development. So finance skills, certainly folks would be familiar with. Development in our organization is really fundraising, which has a very similar skill set to sales, right? And relationship management, customer service. So we knew, again, those could be translated to other industries. But then we took a step back and thought, really, where are our most critical, dire talent needs today? We looked at a lot of data and research that was done into the healthcare industry shortage projections through 2030, and looked at those particular roles that we knew there could be skilled training opportunities for, and also what did the path forward look like? Could folks come into a full-time role? Was there an education component needed? And so then we've expanded further and really pivoted the program from where we started it to think about where are these talent needs that we just simply can't keep up with the supply that we need. And so we've transitioned into radiology, so the apprentices will ultimately become radiology techs.
It's fantastic. And we're very excited about that program. And of course, further evolutions that we're working on in real time. Let's shift the focus a little bit here for a couple of minutes, though, Jenna. What do you consider your major costs and benefits when engaging in the program?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with costs. Certainly, there are some startup costs that are required, right? So partnership costs, training costs that are kind of the startup, getting the apprentices ready to go. But I will say we have found such value in CareerWise as a partner in doing that initial training to level up these high school students to be ready to walk into a professional environment. And so I say that because as I'll talk to other folks around our organization, as we're presenting, new leaders with the idea of bringing apprentices in, and they say, gosh, a high school student, are they mature enough? Any of the kind of concerns someone might have when we would stereotype a high schooler. And really the folks are coming through. So there's those costs, right? There's certainly wage costs for the apprentices. Now, as Becca mentioned, they do typically cost us about 50% less of what a full-time staff member would cost in that role. Again, recognizing there's also supervision costs because that is something that they have a bit more, particularly when we're moving them into these clinical hospital roles. We're talking about they're interacting with patients, right? So at some point, there's another level of supervision and coaching that's required there. So those costs. Programmatically, one of the things that I think really makes our organization special for our apprentices, we really try and think about their holistic experience and their whole self. So we have costs related to a team member that I have that really is responsible for the day-to-day from the employer side and connects the dots from CareerWise to the apprentice to the supervisors and leaders, reports back on performance, reports back on success stories, handles challenges that may come up. So there's that cost as well. And then programmatically, right, we like to celebrate our apprentices. So we had a welcome dinner when our last larger cohort came through and made sure to invite parents and family members so that they too could be a part of this journey with us. We'll continue to do that, be it with graduation celebrations, as we think about folks who transition into full-time roles. How do we acknowledge and recognize that? And then other things like National Apprenticeship Week and making sure that we're doing something a little extra special for them. So those I would say are less costly. But one of the things that at MSK, what we chose to do was centralize that cost in that budget. So as we started, and I would say we're still piloting with some of these newer areas, we can go to the executives in the areas and offer more of the benefits before the cost to them and really give proof of concept, gets them bought in, that then they can add it to their budget moving forward. And in terms of benefits compared to the cost, my goodness, I think there's sometimes too many to list. certainly we're filling our talent needs, both at an apprentice level in the work that they're doing while they're in the apprentice role. The fact that we have them in an apprentice role for a length of time, that's a retention moment right then and there. And those are roles that we traditionally see, I wouldn't say significant turnover, but enough turnover. So to now know that we've got stability in some of these areas, extremely helpful. Certainly there's going to be the actual fact when they move into the role that we are preparing and training and educating them for. That's going to be incredible. We've had some folks transition into full-time work, so again, that return is there as well. I believe we're going to have a nice full-time employee retention come through with these folks as well. We've seen it in other programs that we run. When you're investing time and effort in this holistic approach for folks, they're going to want to stay. There then becomes a loyalty to an employer. And I think in the talent market today, that may not exist if someone is just, essentially coming in the front door without being part of a program like this. That's sometimes lost. I think for us as an organization, certainly this is bringing us a very clear tie to the communities in which we serve and operate. We're recognizing that our students come from all across New York City, all of the boroughs, and they are now going back as ambassadors to their communities and their high schools, talking about MSK. So as we think about some of the underserved populations of New York City who may think they don't have access to care at MSK, or may not go for regular screenings that we know are so necessary for these folks, now they've got this young, youthful person who's talking about how important that is because they work in a radiology department where people are coming for screenings and they can become these very organic educators in their communities. So I think that's really great. And I think the other thing that is so incredible is the way that it is bringing our employees together as a community, right? So when we think about all of the folks across our organization who in some way work with or support these apprentices, it is a feel-good moment. You are literally changing the life trajectory of these kids. How do you not feel great about that? So whether it be a supervisor, a coach, someone who's working on a project with them, someone who they're rotating through for just a short period of time, to all of the operational folks who support these programs as well. It really is just such a neat thing, and people have a great thing to say. And the last thing for us, I think, is our patients, right? That is an unspoken benefit. One of my favorite things is that we have a way for our patients to continuously give feedback, certainly about their experience, but also about the employees that they interact with. And we receive comments about our apprentices and how great they are. Now, the employees may not fully understand even that they're an apprentice, right? But what a testament to how they're becoming such a part of our employer community and showing up so well to our patients as well, which at the end of the day, that's why we're all here. So many benefits, in short.
Yeah, from a patient perspective, I think that sort of interaction has to be phenomenal, right? And different, but in a really positive way for them. I think, I thank you for that, Jenna. And we've really established that there's a lot of upfront investment, but some really clear direct benefits to MSK. I want to, for a second, kind of drill down on some of the direct benefits for the apprentices themselves, however. What impact have you seen there? You mentioned something about having the opportunity to change lives, but how have you practically seen that through your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as we've had from our very first cohort of apprentices who, we now have full-time employees, I think it's watching them grow and develop as young people, first and foremost, is such a benefit for them, right? They're getting an opportunity to be among, I'll say it here at MSK, some of the best, brightest researchers, physicians, clinicians, folks that are really out there. So there's the tangible piece of they are literally learning from the best in the business is really neat. I think for the apprentices, the hands-on training, right? If we think about, I think we've had this conversation, Tony, you and I before, when we think back to what were our high school jobs. And, I think because we have these conversations, I can extract out some of the skills maybe that I learned when I was serving coffee through a drive-through, right? But at the end, in customer service, and, I can talk to anybody, right? But
I
at
was a tutor, so
See, at the end of the day, we have to think like, what are these tangible skills of the apprentices, regardless of which one of our occupational programs they're in, that they're walking away with, and that these are not only things that they can tangibly use in their full-time job with us, but they are things that they are going to be able to use in their career moving forward. And so you and I have talked about, we've kind of pulled out what some of those competencies were that we learned. We are intentionally instilling these into these students. So they, as far as I'm concerned, they have a true leg up on their peers who will either be entering the workforce without having come through an apprenticeship program, or even who have gone in only a college path versus a work, learn, earn, train, educate at the same time. And so I think those are some big ones. Certainly the economic advancement is a big one. As I've talked to many of our apprentices over the years, they are often coming from lower income families and households. Their parents are working in perhaps unskilled jobs or are working below their skill level because perhaps they've immigrated to the country and they cannot, obtain licensure that's needed. Many of them, as our students who are in our clinical programs are attending college as well, working towards associate's degrees. Many of them are very first in their families to go to school, and without this program would have never considered it, let alone the fact that we're supplementing the education costs for them as well. So there's a lot that's happening for the apprentice. I think that's a short list. I'm sure they would say even more things, but I think, the responsibility to show up to work each day, right? To be able to juggle and balance high school and work, college and work, to learn, they're learning things that I think many of us either learned the hard way, didn't learn, which I also watch happen around other young people who are earlier in their careers. We had an apprentice who unfortunately had a death in their family and was planning to come to work that day. And we said, no. But again, there's very many coachable moments for these apprentices that I think perhaps they wouldn't get in other situations. And so I think when they step back and look, they're realizing all, beyond just the paycheck, what they're really getting.
yeah, I appreciate that, Jenna. I think really behind everything that you just said, there is such a deep intention behind ensuring that all of that happens, and not only for the apprentice, which is probably our most important stakeholder here, but also for the business, right? And if we don't pursue these things intentionally, then success at this level can't happen. Along those same lines, let's talk about intention for a minute and how you've been intentional in standing up this program. What are some strategies that you've employed to ensure that apprentices do have this positive experience that in turn creates this positive ROI through metrics like retention, skill progression, and ongoing employment?
Yeah. So, I think at first and foremost, it's remembering that these are young people, right? And so meeting young people where they are, recognizing where they're starting. And I think each cohort that comes in, we can kind of assess and understand where we're starting from in terms of their development. I think in standing something like this up, and now we've done it with four different occupational areas. So we've had to, I don't want to say start from the beginning, but there's just unknown pieces that you won't know until you kind of start in a new area. But I think we've really tried to lean on what we've learned historically, what other organizations in New York City have learned, which we've really come to CareerWise as a partner to say, we're challenged with this or we're thinking about this, and just looking at it holistically. I think we can't just look at it as we need X or Y from an employer. And then what is the downstream impact to the apprentice? And then what is the impact to their family, right? So even as we think about, I'll give an example, as we think about, would it be advantageous for the apprentice to work on a weekend, right? Versus for coming after school, because maybe their school, we all know what New York City transit and transportation can be like. Sometimes things just take a long way or don't have a very direct route. And so we've looked at those things, but then does it negatively impact their family situation or family time? And so just being really mindful to think through that and to also recognize even our best and brightest young people do not always have problem solving skills the way that we do. And so thinking about how can we supplement things like that to help them really resource around some of the things they might encounter. And similarly, I think just being intentional that of all the players that are involved and making sure everyone is brought along on all of the decisions, right? We can't, even though my team leads this from a programmatic perspective, we can't assume that what works for us is going to work for the supervisors or is going to work for the apprentices. And so I think just having a continuous feedback loop and being able to really understand what's working, what's not, how do you pivot and drop the things that aren't working, and just go to everyone with a bit of an open-mindedness is really been a helpful tactic for us.
I love that, Jenna. I love that. I'm curious, however, Becca, going back to you. I know you and I have a very interesting perspective, right? Because we work with, many employer partners across many different industries. But how have you observed this element of intention playing a key factor towards ensuring success for apprenticeships?
Yeah, I mean, what's really resonating with me with everything Jenna is saying is employers achieve return on investment when they find that interest convergence between the value that they're getting and the value the young person or the apprentice is getting. That sometimes those things feel like they can be in opposition of each other, but what we tried to do in CareerWise in our measurement framework was find the ways that they are two sides to the same coin, right? So where are we going to be able to build value for the employer, and what does that value mean and look like for the outcomes and the value that's brought to the apprentice, and how can we start to weave that narrative a little bit more in a way that I don't think we often do. Sometimes we just see these things in opposition to one another, but they don't need to be, and they're not. I mean, particularly around pieces of how are you going to ensure programmatic retention? How are you going to ensure that we're looking holistically at a young person and their life and all they're managing to get from point A to point B, often against a lot of odds, and say, wow, what a strength that is, rather than, well, they just didn't show up one time. The flip side to that is that the employer needs to be taken care of and they need to feel supported, and this needs to work for them. And a lot of them are moving mountains to make this work within very entrenched structures and systems. And so a big part of what CareerWise's role is trying to be extra layer of support and helping all of our partners navigate each of those pieces, and again, find where that convergence lives. Which is the work, but it takes really excellent partners like MSK and our other employers who are really invested in figuring out each piece of this puzzle along the way. And again, I think what we're seeing in our program is with that kind of dedication, we are really moving the needle towards a lot of these really great benefits, and we're seeing that across a lot of our employer partners.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and really speaks to the fact that it literally takes a village to make all of this work, right? Our employer partners can't do this alone in the silo. We can't do this alone in the cycle. It's only through the efforts that we pursue together that we can make this work. So on that note, Jenna, going back to ROI specifically, what factors or metrics does MSK consider when measuring this over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say, not data driven specifically, but we're looking at is it working? What is the overall sentiment? What is the feedback that we're getting from supervisors on the quality of the apprentices, so their performance, their ability to learn and develop? And then ultimately, are we able to continue to scale this, right? So the best, way for me to say, yes, this is successful is that we're able to bring on additional apprentices and we're ultimately able to grow our program. When we're looking at it from a numbers perspective, certainly I'm looking to understand how many apprentices are converting to full-time employees. What does retention look like? Now, we've been extremely lucky from a retention perspective that we have really maintained, I think, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, but all but one in the years that we've had our students. And it's really quite impressive, but is a testament to we continue to try and recognize that all of these moments were coaching and development moments. And when we did ultimately have a retention, someone who was looking to offboard, we had a thoughtful offboarding plan for that apprentice as well, and really thought about how do we support them if they wanted to stay with us as an organization in a different capacity, or let them know at the very least that the door was open because now we had spent a decent enough time training them. Let's not lose that either. And so I think, those are the big things that we're looking at. We're not doing, we're not doing apples to apples performance appraisals on the students. But we are really looking through what does that look like for our students who are in education programs. Of course, we're looking and tracking that they're progressing as they need to in those programs as well. But ultimately, are they meeting their competency assessments? Are they continuing to progress forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think all of that, Jenna, really, again, it speaks to a great level of intention about shaping that experience that really dictates those outcomes, right? I'm curious, this kind of leads me to this because again, there is no ROI if there is an impact felt by the employer partner through the work that the apprentice is doing. So, Becca, curious from your perspective, what does that mean, like productivity, work produced as a shared metric?
Yeah, and to just give some context, I think one of the big powers of apprenticeship is it again provides structure to a lot of the what we hear are intractable challenges in our workforce now, which is how are we defining skills? We keep saying there's a skills gap. What does that mean? What are those skills? How do we then train for them? How are we assessing training? And essentially, it's how are we putting industry in the driver's seat to say this is the outcome that we need to see, and now we're backwards mapping our programs to that outcome. And a big part of that is around assessment and benchmarking progress towards a specific skills progression that is suitable to employers to say, yes, this meets equivalency to a full-time employee by the time training is complete or more. And so within the program, what that looks like is really defining with employers what their skills bundles look like. So their occupation specific skills, as well as these professional skills, and assessing those skills twice a year and then for us to build benchmarks internally about where apprentices should be, looking at that by occupation, by cohort. Where are we seeing occupations that are clearly very suitable to on-the-job training because apprentices are kind of like rocket ships, and learning on the job, very hands-on jobs, very kind of knowledge-based jobs are often like that. And then where are we seeing occupations that need quite a lot of additional related training and instruction, additional support, because there's just it's either an industry that's evolving really rapidly. So what you have to keep learning and how you have to keep evolving training is really challenging, or it's already, an occupation that requires quite a lot of technical skills. All of this to say, the term that we hear a lot in apprenticeship is productivity. What is the amount of kind of, again, this kind of skilled work that we're seeing on the job? And that being a major benefit to employers that they're going to look at in terms of, are they getting a return on their investment? So for CareerWise, we provide that kind of general measure within our assessments as what is their progress to proficiency, their overall proficiency across their different skills, as well as their proficiency both in just their occupation skills and their professional skills. I like to think of proficiency and productivity as kind of two different things. I think proficiency is this, how are we assessing what the supervisor is observing in terms of doing and demonstrating a skill on the job. And I really think of productivity as a shared metric. And it's a lot of what Jen is talking about, which is how are we building an infrastructure and support and operations to create an environment where someone feels like they can be and are successful. And that's really what productivity is, because it is not for an individual alone. And we know this, there's a lot of social structures and barriers often that could prevent someone from either being or being perceived as productive on the job. And I think when we work with employers and they understand this youth lens and youth development lens, but also understand the general kind of development, human development nature of these types of programs, that's where you start to really see movement on how are we operationalizing productivity, bringing in parents as partners or guardians as partners in the program, reaching out to students really early so that they just have brand recognition of what your business is and what all the different professional options are there. Then when they matriculate on the job, understanding what their needs are, how we're going to resource those needs and ensure that they're able to persist through the program. That all creates this productivity, and that's in turn what helps generate this positive return on investment.
And on that note, it's really important how we define these things because all of these things are in service to producing that ROI, which is an excellent segue to this question. For you, Jenna, how long does it take you all over at MSK to achieve a positive return on investment with an individual cohort of apprentices? What's that process like?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So as we think about our onboarding of our apprentices and any new hire, really, we're looking at about 6 months to get them up to speed, fully ready to take on some, less supervised, not fully independent, right? Because ultimately they're in an apprentice role, but to really be at the point where they are delivering on what they're supposed to be. And part of that time frame, when we're thinking about, we're healthcare, right? Extremely regulated industry. They have additional onboarding that we have very intentionally designed for them, because as we think about patient privacy and other things that adult employees who are coming in probably either have worked somewhere where they've maybe participated in some of that learning or just have a slightly higher level of maturity, we recognize there's a need to do some of this in a way that is really going to hit the mark for these younger workers. And so in doing that, we've really built out what that looks like, as well as we think it is important to start with rotational experience, right? So again, in that time until they're really ready to go start doing these tasks and activities, we're helping them get an understanding. Because as I like to say, and you've both heard me say it before, I hope that our young people have not been in a hospital and don't know what some of these roles and areas are, right? I hope that they've never been to the emergency room or have had no one with cancer that has brought them to MSK. Not going to always be the case, but Tony, to your point, that's where I think we can continue to build out what are these earlier exposure moments to these careers, and Becca to thinking about brand recognition and role recognition. But we really try and do that, give them an opportunity to understand the teams that they're working with, have some friendly faces around, and also start to solidify as an apprentice group, right? I think there's something to be said about having a number of them come through in a cohort. We certainly over the last couple of years have truly expanded, because I think there is just a sense of belonging amongst them then. We're not talking about hundreds of high school students running through our halls of our hospital. We're talking about, a smaller amount. And so really having the opportunity for them to be able to also get to that level of productivity together and lean on one another, I think has been very helpful for us.
Right. And I think there's something to be said about the fact that, relatively you're able to achieve that type of return in again, a relatively short amount of time,
Mhm.
right? So again, that's a testament to the program that you've been able to build. I think from that point, question for you both, what do apprenticeship programs and intermediaries like CareerWise need to focus on to ensure that employers are able to achieve this positive ROI? And Becca, why don't we start with you on this?
Yeah, there's a number of things. I think we've touched on a lot of them today. I think a big one is training and skills and a focus and making sure that the skills you're training for are clearly defined, um, industry informed and driven, um, and constantly being revisited to make sure that they're relevant. This is quite an undertaking to manage, and especially a system where this is historically very decentralized. But I think we're seeing really great movement locally with organizations that are helping bring these voices together, kind of create organization around this and efficiency, so that we can set really clear expectations within training programs about what is to be accomplished and then appropriately resource and support that level of training. The second is related. It's setting really clear expectations early. I think, as we talked about, a lot of employers kind of go through an evolution in kind of what this is for them and what it might mean. But making sure, I think sometimes there's a gap between what an employer knows that they want and what the expectations they have are for the program, and what is maybe being articulated to a young person and their family, and then how they're making decisions around next steps. Am I going to go to college? Am I going to do this? Am I going to try to do both? And we've seen the best success when the program is able to help employers bridge that communication gap and set really clear expectations early on. It aids in recruitment. It aids in that ongoing touch point throughout the apprenticeship to say, how are you doing? Are you on track? Because you know what you're on track towards, right? So it's really simple, but very important. And then the third is just mitigating exit. Retention is huge in this program. Retention is what breeds, I think, all of these other benefits. And we're seeing a lot of progress made in our program in our overall retention, which I think is a testament both to the strength of our employers and the commitment of our employers, this kind of ongoing learning and continuous improvement that we're doing together, and this broader socialization of what apprenticeship is and the value proposition of apprenticeship, both to our employers and to our young people. And again, finding that convergence. And as that's improving over time, with retention comes skills progression, comes, conversions to employment, full-time or permanent employment, and then comes all those more long-term benefits that we need to see in the program in order for employers to continue to engage.
Yeah, thanks for that, Becca. All three of those elements are absolutely mission critical to ensuring that this actually works, right? And really can only be accomplished through deep collaboration between the apprenticeship program or intermediary and the employer partner. Jenna, would love to get your perspective here.
Yeah, I would add a couple things to that. I mean, I definitely echo all of those sentiments, Becca. I think they're spot on. I would say the other things that are really helpful, having strong education partners, right? So as we think towards, or as I look at where we've evolved, it's really thinking about where is there coursework that can happen within the classroom for these students at earlier points before they're coming through to an employer. Also, where is there just flexibility for them in terms of what their schedule looks like as they participate in an apprenticeship, and just schools that are really wrapping their arms around this as this is the path towards a future for their students. So I think that's been really helpful and will continue to remain helpful. I think also really from the employer perspective, having someone who's championing this, right? An executive or a leader who strongly believes in apprenticeship and can continue to talk about it and really think through where this goes in alignment to an organization's strategic goals, right? It can't just sit to the side as, well, we've got this workforce program over here. That's not going to work. And so I think part of our success has really been in aligning it to where are we going as an organization, and it touches on so many parts of our strategic priorities that it's hard for anyone at an executive level to not be able to see it. I think to that end, also having the right front line to the apprentice folks in place, right? So one of the things that makes us so successful is the team we have supporting our apprentices and working directly with CareerWise and having honest, transparent conversations about where things are going extremely well and where we know we want to continue to optimize. I think that's really important. And then the parents, right? And so I think we are in guardians and adults in these young people's lives. How do we continue to bring them along on this journey as well? Because at the end of the day, whether they be folks who are familiar with the work these apprentices are doing or can't quite picture it, we want them to be able to be supported while they're at home as well, because we do know they're probably most certainly still living at home, right? So I think that's a really helpful thing for us to think about. How do we ensure that the feel good continues when they get home as well?
Yeah, I think that last point is really important and something that's certainly not lost on the three of us, right? That parental involvement. Again, when we think about it, these are the folks that are supporting our apprentices the most at home. So they have to understand what this is holistically in order to continue to provide that encouragement to their children to see it through. So thank you for that. Before we wrap and perhaps, entertain some questions from our audience, any advice to new employers who might be thinking about or about to, embark on this road towards standing up youth apprenticeships?
Ooh, just go for it. No, I think
Just do
no,
it.
just do it. Just do it. No, I think there are enough of us, and I say us, meaning employers in varying industries in New York City and throughout the US, who have stood up these programs and are willing to share our models. So don't feel like you have, and CareerWise has access to all of us, right? Don't feel like you have to start from a blank page of paper and say, I know we have a need in pharmacy, but I don't know where to start. Or I know I have a need for call center reps, but I'm not sure where to start here. We all are working off of playbooks by industry, by occupation. Ask for them, ask for help. This isn't something we certainly, I don't think, could have stood it up by ourselves. So find that partner to help you do that. I also, and it may not be everyone's favorite response, but I would avoid doing onesies and twosies. I would try and bring in at least 5 into an occupation at any time. That is how you will start to really be able to validate if it's working. Otherwise, you are literally talking about an individual that could make or break the story of how you could really invest in and build out apprenticeship at your organization. And at some point, that's too much weight to go on the shoulders of a young person. So I would definitely say, I know folks like to start small on things and pilot things out, but definitely try. I don't think, we certainly a few years ago started without all the answers, and we've figured some of it out as we've gone. And we couldn't be happier and prouder.
I love that. So just do it. And if you're gonna do it, bring
Okay.
on cohorts of people.
Yes.
Awesome. Becca,
Yeah, I agree. Just do it. I think, we're still figuring out largely how to do this in especially modern occupations in the US, and how to make some of these translations to models we see in other places that have this kind of proven model of return on investment. And we see that here, and our firms see that here. I'll echo what I said at the beginning, which is for everyone, you have to root the way you're measuring this in what your motivations for engaging are. And so first asking yourselves as an organization, what are our motivations for engaging and what's important to us in this work, is a good place to start. And then, as Jenna said, leveraging the expertise of people who have been learning on the fly and doing this for several years now is going to be really important, because no one needs to start from scratch. But this is inherently a learning model. And so the people who are drawn to it, I think, are interested in invested in that learning. And I think a lot of our companies are trying to figure out, how do we really operationalize learning within our firms? And an apprenticeship is a great way to do that for all these reasons. And yeah, so that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's awesome too. That's awesome. So again, just do it. Learn with us in order to promote learning in your respective firms. I'm curious, for those of us, you all still with us, are there any questions? Maybe we have time for one or two questions before we wrap. If you have a question, please feel free to drop it in that box on the bottom of your screen that is labeled Q&A. And also, no pressure, everyone.
I'll add as a filler that we've talked to a lot of different companies, and that's one of the limitations of being an intermediary in this work, is that we don't have access to everyone's proprietary information to understand how really they measure return on investment. One of the benefits is that you, again, have to be a little bit strategic in figuring out what are the themes, but you also get to hear, again, the diversity in how people are measuring these programs. And so I think sometimes we come to these conversations wanting, like, no, give me the specific model for how I'm supposed to measure this thing out. And we can certainly help companies build those models in a way that works for them. But the fact of the matter is, you go all over the world and all over the United States, and everyone's models look different. And the way they weigh, again, all of these costs and benefits is going to be different. And that's really important to remember in this, that there's going to be some tried and true standards, but that this is what is supposed to work for your company. And so our motivation really as an intermediary is to help people figure that out.
Awesome. We have two questions, and
My filler worked.
it did. It did. So the first was for you, Jenna. Who were the key departments at MSK that needed to engage to build the training program and the ladder for career advancement? Were clinical providers engaged? Was this HR? Just who were the players on your side?
Excellent question, Kelly. Yeah, so for us, it started with HR. So we took this as a starting point, and we initially did the data dive to understand where the needs were, right? So talked to our talent acquisition folks, looked at market data, understood what that looked like, then took it to the clinical leaders, right? So I'll put our business operations folks to the side for a second, but in the clinical situation, so in radiology, we started at the top, started with the executive in that area, had a conversation about what this could look like broadly. We didn't know the details at that point, and then continued our way down until we got to the head of clinical operations, and had a really, again, at the time, it was pretty broad conversation about where we thought this could fit. At the time, we were actually rolling out a new full-time role, which was going to be a radiology aid role, not necessarily having to be a stepping stone up the ladder to a rad tech, but very likely that folks who would perform in that role might be interested in continuing forward. We recognized that was going to be an excellent area to essentially build something before that role, which would be the apprentice radiology aid role. And so we built out what that would look like and how we would grow the skill set and competencies during the length of the apprenticeship. From there, we also brought in folks to understand what would be the best education providers as we thought about helping folks obtain their associate's degree as they make their way towards rad tech. Where and how could we support clinical hours in time that was needed? and really brought through folks, went to the chair of the department to understand and make sure there was buy-in there as well. And then brought along all the clinical leaders, right? Because as we think about how broad-based radiology is, and even if we think about Manhattan, we have multiple locations where our apprentices work. We needed to make sure that everybody was on board, and most importantly, also knowing that these were going to be young people. And what is it like to work alongside young people and be able to, even without formally saying Tony is your mentor, be able to ensure that people are going to offer mentorship and coaching if there was a misstep by an apprentice at any point, versus it being perhaps how someone might have a response to someone who is their direct peer. So we really brought all of that together. As I mentioned at the beginning, we took HR held a central budget for this, and then essentially the departments are responsible for the precepting, the coaching, the clinical supervision, and the most of our clinical departments have education teams, and so they are direct partners as well.
Thank you for that, Jenna. I do want to apologize and just be mindful of the fact that we are at time, so unfortunately won't be able to field any of the remaining questions. We actually did get quite a few, which is encouraging. However, to close us out, why don't we do this lightning round of questions? Any final thoughts? Jenna, Becca.
Final thoughts, I would say, we are, as we build our apprenticeship, I'm looking guaranteed employment. We do look to ensure that there's going to be a role for folks if they want it afterwards. I think short-term goals are going to get you to long-term goals. So I think that's really important. And to get buy-in from an employer, just bring data. I think that's the most important thing. Part of this is a feel-good community diversification representation moment, but a lot of it is filling your talent needs, and that's where it can also be driven by.
Fantastic. And Becca?
Yeah, I'd echo that. And I'd say included in data is apprentice testimony and voices. No one speaks better about this program and than a young person. And so padding narrative with some of that more quantitative data is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate you both for joining us today and really having this conversation and getting really deep into it. It is my pleasure to work with you both very, very often, and it is a bright spot in my work. So thank you both. Thank all of you who were able to join us today. Happy National Apprenticeship Week again. And final thought from me, this is a bit of a revolution, right? This work has real meaning and impact, and there is huge opportunity to participate. So if you're already a partner, please continue to partner with us so that we can create real impact. And if you're not, well, what are you waiting for? Just do it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.